There is a day quiet, unannounced, when the constant urge to repair yourself suddenly loosens its grip. Nothing magical occurs, no fireworks, yet something unmistakable settles in. I want to begin there, because that moment does not feel like success. It feels like relief. And relief, I have learned, is far more honest than triumph. For most of our lives, we are trained to believe that something is fundamentally wrong with us. This belief is so deeply woven into our thinking that we rarely question it. We assume improvement is necessary, correction is urgent, and fixing ourselves is the highest form of responsibility. But one day, if you are attentive, you notice that this entire project rests on an unexamined assumption. Before I go further, let me ask you something directly. Have you ever had a moment, even briefly, where you sensed that nothing about you actually needed fixing, and that the pressure to improve was the problem itself? If that resonates, I invite you to share your experience in the comments, because recognizing this is not common, but it is profoundly human. Here is a fact that often surprises people. The idea that you are broken is not natural. It is learned. It comes from comparison, measurement, and constant evaluation. Children do not begin life believing they are insufficient. That belief arrives later, imported through language, standards, and expectations. When I look closely at this urge to fix ourselves, I see that it is driven not by wisdom but by fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being left behind, fear of failing some invisible test that no one has clearly defined. The mind convinces us that improvement will bring peace, but peace is always postponed until the next adjustment is made. This creates a strange loop. You are told to love yourself, but only after you change. You are told to accept yourself, but only once you improve. This is not acceptance at all. It is conditional tolerance disguised as self-care. Here is an argument worth considering carefully. A being that truly needed fixing would not be capable of noticing its own incompleteness. The very awareness that says, "something is wrong with me," is already whole enough to observe the thought. That awareness does not need improvement, it needs recognition. When this recognition begins to dawn, it does not make you passive or indifferent. That is a common misunderstanding. Realizing nothing needs fixing does not mean nothing can change. It means change no longer comes from self-rejection. You start to see how much energy has been spent resisting yourself, fighting your thoughts, correcting your emotions, policing your inner life. This resistance has been exhausting, and exhaustion has been mistaken for effort, as if struggle itself were proof of virtue. A simple fact emerges here. Growth that comes from opposition is violent. Growth that comes from understanding is organic. One tightens, the other unfolds. The day you realize nothing needs fixing, you do not suddenly become perfect. You become honest. You stop pretending that wholeness is something to be earned. You notice that life has been happening quite successfully without your constant interference. Look closely at how often the mind narrates improvement as survival. If I don't fix this, I won't be loved. If I don't change, I'll be left behind. These are not facts. They are inherited fears, masquerading as motivation. Here is a call to reflection. Notice how often you speak to yourself as a problem rather than a process. Notice the tone of your inner voice. Is it curious or corrective? Is it listening or constantly adjusting? When you stop assuming something is wrong, listening becomes possible. And listening, I assure you, is far more intelligent than fixing. This realization also alters how you see others. When you no longer treat yourself as a project, you stop treating people as problems to be solved. Compassion becomes natural, not forced. You understand that everyone is navigating the same pressure, the same quiet anxiety of not being enough. There is another fact that deserves attention. Life does not improve itself by self-hatred. Nature does not wake up in the morning and decide it must be better than it was yesterday. Trees grow because growth is their nature, not because they are dissatisfied with their current shape. Human beings are no different, except we have learned to mistrust our own process. The day you realize nothing needs fixing, effort transforms. You still learn, you still refine, you still respond to circumstances, but the desperation disappears. Action arises from clarity, not from shame. This is where a subtle freedom appears. You are no longer running toward an imagined future where you will finally be acceptable. You begin living where you are. And where you are, right now, is already included in reality. That inclusion is not an idea, it is an experience, and once tasted, it cannot be forgotten. This is only the beginning of what unfolds when the fixing mindset collapses. As this realization deepens, you begin to notice how subtle the habit of fixing truly is. It does not always announce itself as self-criticism. Sometimes it disguises itself as discipline, ambition, or even spirituality. It whispers, just a little more work on yourself, and then you'll be ready. Ready for what? It never quite says. Here is a fact that becomes clear when you watch closely. The fixing impulse never arrives with an endpoint. There is always another layer, another refinement, another flaw waiting to be addressed. This is not because you are endlessly deficient, but because the habit itself feeds on continuation. When you assume you need fixing, you turn life into a rehearsal. You are always preparing, always adjusting, always becoming but never arriving. And the tragedy of that posture is not effort itself, but postponement. You postpone peace. You postpone rest. You postpone being at home in yourself. The moment you question this, something loosens. You begin to see that the sense of being unfinished is not evidence of failure. It is simply the nature of living systems. Rivers do not complete themselves. They flow. And yet no one suggests a river is broken because it has not reached the ocean yet. Here is an argument I want to make very clearly. Improvement that is rooted in dissatisfaction reinforces dissatisfaction. You may become more skilled, more disciplined, more polished, and still feel incomplete, because the underlying assumption has not changed. When that assumption falls away, improvement takes on a different quality. You learn not because you are inadequate, but because learning is enjoyable. You change not to escape yourself, but to express yourself more clearly. Effort becomes play rather than punishment. This is why the realization that nothing needs fixing is not passive. It is liberating. It frees energy that was previously locked into self-surveillance. You stop monitoring yourself like a project manager and start inhabiting yourself like a living being. Notice how often tension arises from the thought, I shouldn't be feeling this. That sentence alone creates conflict. Emotions become problems instead of signals. Thoughts become enemies instead of weather. But when you stop trying to fix your inner life, you discover that emotions move naturally when allowed. A fact worth emphasizing. Resistance prolongs experience. Allowance transforms it. This does not mean indulging every impulse or abandoning responsibility. It means meeting experience honestly before deciding how to respond. Fixing skips that step. Understanding begins there. As this understanding grows, you may feel a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief, because the burden of self-correction lightens. Grief, because you see how much of your life was spent believing you were not enough. That grief is not a setback, it is a sign of clarity. Here is a direct call to thought. Ask yourself how much of your striving has been fueled by fear rather than curiosity. Not to judge it, but to see it. Seeing is enough. Awareness itself begins the reorganization. You may also notice that stillness becomes less threatening. When you are no longer trying to fix yourself, silence no longer feels like wasted time. It feels nourishing. You are not avoiding improvement. You are resting in being. This is where trust quietly reappears. Trust in your own process. Trust in life's intelligence. Trust that growth does not require constant supervision. The idea that nothing needs fixing does not deny suffering. It changes how suffering is met. Instead of asking, what is wrong with me? You ask, what is being experienced. That shift removes the personal attack from pain. Pain becomes part of the movement of life, not a verdict on your worth. And as this perspective settles, you realize something remarkable. You were never standing outside life, trying to earn your place. You were always inside it, participating fully, even while doubting yourself. This realization does not shout. It whispers, and yet it changes the tone of everything. When this understanding is no longer just an idea, but a lived reality, life begins to move with a different rhythm. You still encounter challenges, limitations, and uncertainty, but they are no longer interpreted as evidence that something has gone wrong. They are seen as part of the texture of being alive. Here is a fact that becomes unmistakable at this stage. Wholeness is not the absence of difficulty. Wholeness is the absence of internal division. When you stop opposing yourself, experience integrates naturally. You notice that the mind still suggests improvements, but the urgency is gone. The voice that once demanded correction now offers possibilities. There is a tremendous difference between "I must change to be acceptable" and "I can change because life is creative." This shift brings an unexpected simplicity. Decisions are made more easily because they are not loaded with self-judgment. You act, you observe the result, and you adjust without turning the process into a personal failure or success story. Here is an argument that deserves careful attention. Life does not ask you to be flawless. It asks you to be present. Perfection is a concept. Presence is an experience. When you are present, even mistakes become informative rather than humiliating. They show you something about the system you are part of, not something shameful about who you are. As this becomes clear, compassion deepens, not as a moral obligation, but as a natural response. You recognize in others the same pressure you once placed on yourself. You see how desperately people are trying to fix themselves into worthiness, and you understand why they are tired. This understanding does not make you superior. It makes you gentle. Here is a direct call to action. The next time you notice the impulse to fix yourself, pause. Ask whether anything is actually broken, or whether life is simply asking for attention. That pause alone can dissolve years of struggle. You may find that creativity flows more freely now. When self-criticism relaxes, expression expands. Work becomes less about proving value and more about participating in something meaningful. Relationships shift as well. When you no longer approach yourself as a project, you stop approaching others as incomplete. You listen more, you interfere less, you allow people to be where they are. This does not mean tolerating harm or avoiding boundaries. It means responding without the extra layer of judgment that says, "This shouldn't be happening." One of the most liberating realizations at this stage is that peace does not arrive at the end of improvement. Peace is available in the middle of life, exactly as it is. Improvement can still happen, but it happens inside peace, not in pursuit of it. That reversal changes everything. You stop chasing a future version of yourself who will finally deserve rest. You rest now, and from that rest, action becomes more intelligent. Here is the quiet truth many never discover. The sense that something needs fixing was never about you. It was about misunderstanding what it means to be human. Humans are not machines that require constant adjustment. They are living processes that unfold through experience. The day you realize nothing needs fixing is not the end of growth, it is the end of unnecessary suffering. And once that ends, life does not become perfect. It becomes real, and that reality, with all its movement and mystery, is enough.